A couple of years ago, I gave a sermon on one of the verses in our parsha this week. Let no one be found among you who consigns his son or daughter to the fire, who is a soothsayer, diviner, a sorcerer, no one who casts spells or who consults ghosts or familiar spirits, or inquires of the dead. For anyone who does such things is abhorrent to God. Toeva. The word abhorrent in Hebrew is toeva. It's the same word used throughout Leviticus and the holiness codes. It is the strongest language the Torah has to condemn an act. And today when we think about it, things like astrology, going to see a fortune teller, it seems kind of silly that one of the highest commandments in our tradition, one of the strongest prohibitions, is against doing such things. Bertrand Russell once famously quipped that science has lessened our belief in magic, and yet sorcery is condemned by the church as still a possible sin. We don't believe in magic. How can it be sinful? And yet when I was in rabbinical school, I wrote a tshuva on this very issue. I wrote a tshuva for our halacha class on witchcraft and fortune telling. In part of it, I focused on the ethical issues. By allowing it to happen, by encouraging it, looking at it as just something silly on the side, we allow some people to really be preyed upon. People who've lost a loved one, people who are suffering emotionally, psychologically, be preyed upon by a multi-billion-dollar industry. And yet, as just a side part of that, I talked about another issue. Besides allowing people to be taken advantage of, the other side part of that issue is that it adds to unscientific beliefs, unscientific ways of thinking, which are a danger. At that time, a few years ago, I talked about climate change. But today, I want to take it in a little bit of a different direction. Because when we allow unscientific thinking, even when it seems silly, even when it seems frivolous or benign, there's a real danger. Because it makes it more acceptable for others to hold unscientific views that really are dangerous. If we don't rush to correct unfounded, non-evidence-based ideas, like the idea that where stars are in the sky can affect and impact our lives, it leads to real danger. Take this, for example. We used to laugh at people that had these kinds of views. They were a small fringe group. A survey from 20 years ago found that 4% of Americans believe Elvis is still alive. Another 3% weren't sure if he was alive or not. Maybe. It's possible. That 7% of Americans who think Elvis is either alive or possibly alive decades after his death. It's not a lot, 7%. Except that that's millions of people. Millions of people. Another poll suggests that roughly 1 in 20 people don't believe that Neil Armstrong really landed on the moon. This happened 50 years ago. And yet today, 1 in 20 people. We have about 60 people here today. Let's raise our hands. 3 of you shouldn't believe that Neil Armstrong really landed on the moon. I'm happy to see no hands in our community are going up. But think about it. It's benign, it's silly, but it's a ridiculous belief. But allowing ridiculous beliefs to exist and persist in society, to continue to grow, it's not just that idea, but that way of thinking. It's not just America either. A poll taken here in Canada 5 years after the September 11th attack found that 1 in 5 Canadians believe the attacks were orchestrated not by Al-Qaeda, but by highly influential Americans to gain power. 1 in 5. Less funny perhaps than other conspiracy theories, because we're talking now about an event where people died. But you still might be asking, what's the harm in people believing that? We can take another conspiracy theory floating around the United States right now. In a country with one of the highest rates of gun deaths in the world. 8 times more people die of gun violence in the United States than in Canada, even when you adjust for population size. The United States has nearly 100 times more gun deaths than the United Kingdom. And yet, millions of Americans believe that school shootings like the tragedies that took place at Sandy Hook Elementary School or Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, were fake. The victims were simply actors, and they're there to push an agenda, to take guns from people. That's a lot less funny than aliens building the pyramids. And the fact is that people in the United States are living in 2 different realities. And living in those 2 different realities prevents any kind of real change or intelligent discussion, the ability to fix and address a problem that kills tens of thousands of Americans a year. And it's not just the United States that we see these issues. It's all around the world. We seem to have perpetuated a reality where in 2021, people can believe things because they feel a certain way, as opposed to facts and evidence. It gets really less funny when we talk about vaccinations. The science is in, it's clear, they are good. They are a modern miracle. They have helped save countless lives throughout history, prevented immeasurable pain and suffering, and they've been around for centuries. The first vaccine credited to Dr. Edward Jenner goes back to 1796. He began inoculating people against smallpox. And yet, hundreds of years later, there are all sorts of preventable diseases, illnesses of which we have a vaccine that still spread around the world. Not because of a lack of a cure or resources, but because of a lack of understanding of facts and evidence. Some people in the past may have found it funny, quietly laughing to themselves at those who didn't believe in getting a flu shot because they thought maybe it can cause autism, or at their friend or colleague who didn't get the flu shot because they believed the shot itself is what made them sick and gave them the flu. It's not funny. We're not laughing anymore because we see the possibility of a 4th wave on the horizon. Years ago, I remember getting in an argument with a classmate who didn't get the flu shot each year. They believed that they didn't need it. They were young and healthy, and the flu didn't pose much of a threat to them. I argued back that it wasn't about them. It's about those who are unable to get vaccinated because of other medical conditions. It's about the young and the elderly in our communities who are at serious risk from something as benign to many of us as the flu. But today, that person now gets it. Because today, most of us get it. Because today, words like herd immunity aren't just in the journals of aren't just in the pages of a medical journal, but it's on the headlines of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Globe and Mail, and nearly everywhere else you look. And yet, despite that, despite the widespread availability of knowledge, despite the widespread availability and easy access to the vaccine today here in Canada, 3 in 10 eligible Canadians aren't vaccinated. I speak to congregants who have had the vaccine, but who are afraid to start going out again. Afraid to start going out because of the rising numbers due to those who have chosen not to partake in the same reality as the rest of us. Not to take a medical miracle that can not only save their own lives, but protect the rest of us. Chosen not to take an action that could allow us to return to a sense of normal, to children going to school again, to be able to hug friends, to see family. I'm angry. I haven't seen my family since January of last year. I have plans to visit them this fall, but I don't know. I'm getting worried. I might not be able to take that trip because of a future lockdown. Because 3 in 10 Canadians have made the decision that doesn't affect themselves, but affects all of us. And the numbers are even higher in the United States. Tens of millions of Americans are choosing actively to not receive the vaccine. And it's a choice. It's an active choice at this point, a choice which causes real harm. And yet, a recent poll of those who decided to be unvaccinated found that more than half of them believe that the vaccine is a greater danger, a greater risk than the virus itself. Tell that to the people who have lost loved ones this year. Tell that to the doctors, the nurses, the countless others who have worked tirelessly to save the lives of those who have been infected. Tell that to all the families who've missed milestones, who've missed holidays and more, or the people who've lost businesses they spent their lives building because of lockdowns. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. We were getting closer to it. We still are, but we're slowing down. And the truth is, I'm not sure what we can do in the immediate present. I'm not sure how we can convince people who don't believe in science, who don't believe in the same facts as the rest of us. You can't play chess with somebody else who's playing checkers. You can't convince someone with logic and data who simply doesn't believe in it. So I go back to that topic, to the commandment in our Parsha today, forbidding astrology, fortune-telling, all the supernatural acts that are forbidden by the Torah. For a long time, we've written this off as minor prohibitions because we don't believe in their efficacy. But the thinking behind them, it's a real danger. It's a danger in the case of fortune tellers, of mediums, astrologers, and it's a danger in the kind of thinking that it allows to be promoted. When we promote a worldview that lends credence to anti-scientific thinking, it causes danger. For decades, we've encountered ideas and laughed them off as benign conspiracy theories, but today we're reaping the benefits, or the results for that matter. It violates a biblical commandment. Livnei iver lo titen mikshol. Don't place a stumbling block before the blind. As Nechama Leibowitz, the great Torah scholar and educator, taught, the implication of this mitzvah is not the literal blind, but the person ignorant or blind to a situation. Despite the fact that such acts aren't real, they still pose very real dangers and produce victims. And I'm fearful that we've lost this fight, at least for now, at least for a generation who's been raised believing that this is okay, believing that it's okay to take ideas seriously that are not only ridiculous, but can be dangerous. I don't know how we undo what's been done, but we can change for the future. We can choose not to laugh or ignore when we meet somebody who thinks the earth is flat or Elvis is alive. We can teach the next generation that science isn't a belief, but a way of thinking. It's not a choice to believe it scientifically, but a method of discovering facts and truth, of understanding the world, and it's the best invention humanity's ever come up with. Throughout the generations, Jewish scholars have incorporated the greatest scientific discoveries of their time into Jewish thought. It is un-Jewish to not believe in science. It is dangerous. But even if we aren't guilty of that specifically, we're guilty of helping to create a society where so many people have been taught to think so poorly. We see that in our Parsha. We see that in the commandment of the Eglah Rufa, the sacrifice of an animal, a cow, the guilt offering when there's a murderer and nobody knows who committed the act. All the communities that are close hold some responsibility because they allowed a society to be created where such acts can take place. Even if we aren't guilty specifically, we're guilty of helping to create a society where people can think poorly. When you encounter someone who believes the moon landing was fake, fortune tellers are real, 9/11 or school shootings are a hoax, or that vaccines are more dangerous than the viruses they prevent, it is a duty, a religious obligation to speak up. We must speak up against such thinking. Whenever it raises its dangerous head, we must speak up because it's not benign. Our Parsha tells us, tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Justice, justice you shall pursue. Before there can be justice, there has to be knowledge. There has to be understanding. There has to be truth. A court system, a legal system, cannot stand if everybody has their own facts. We must return to that. And it's up to each of us to do our part. Shabbat Shalom.